resisted, and reimagined our worlds, whether through music, movement, visual arts, ritual, or spoken word. The sacred arts continues to hold space for survival, transcendence, justice, and joy. Today's keynote speakers embody that spirit. Dr. Jacob Olupona is the Hugh K. Foster Professor of African and African American Studies and Professor of African Religious Traditions at Harvard University. He currently serves as the chair of the Department in African and African American Studies. He's African American Studies at Harvard University. Professor Olupona studied at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, in 1975, and at Boston University, where he earned his MA and PhD in History of Religion in 1983. He did his National Youth Service Corps at Kyrah College Education in 1975 and taught at the Obafemi Awolowo University in Ile-Ife. Prior to Harvard University, he was a professor at the University of California, Davis. In addition to serving on editorial boards of several influential journals, Dr. Olupona was the president of the African Association for the Study of Religion and served on the board of trustees and the executive council of the American Academy of Religion. Within the AAR, he co-chaired the African religions and indigenous religion groups, received the 2013 Everett Mendelsohn Excellence in Mentoring Award presented by the Student Council of the Harvard University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. He also received the prestigious Martin E. Marty Award for the Public Understanding of Religion from the American Academy of Religion in 2018. And in 2008, he was awarded the highest distinction Nigeria bestows on her scholars, the Nigerian National Order of Merit. He was inducted in the Fellow of a Nigerian Academy of Letters in 2015. Professor Olupona has received many prestigious fellowships, including the John Simon Guggenheim, the American Philosophical Society, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Warner Grant Foundation, the Getty Foundation. Ooh, I'm exhausted. In 2024, he was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He lectured or served as a visiting scholar in residence in Germany, Japan, China, Sweden, South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria. He is everywhere, y'all. He has published several books in dozen journals. His book, City of 201 Gods, Ile-Ife and the Time, Space, and the Imagination received the 2012 Harvard University Cabot Fellowship for Distinguished Faculty Scholarship. His work, Shout Hallelujah, the Protestant Evangelical Church in Nigeria, is impressed with And his book, African Religions, a very short introduction, was translated into Portuguese by Oxford University. His other books included Orisha, Devotion as World Religion, The Globalization of Yoruba Religions, Cultures, and Kinship Religion and Rituals in a Nigerian Community, a phenomenological study of Yoruba festivals, which has become a model for ethnographic research among Yoruba-speaking communities. Based on years of ethnographic research, in his most recent book, In the Twilight of Time, Chief Logo Bamatula, a biography of an African medicine man, explores conversion, indigenous knowledge, and healing through the life and work of Chief Logo Bamatula. That will be the subject of his remarks today. Please welcome Professor Olupona.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the gracious introduction. Good morning to all of us. I didn't say all of you, all of us. I'm glad to be here. I must confess that this is adding another dimension to my academic life. I've always been coming to Yale. Yale is a sister university to Harvard, where I currently work. But this is my first experience coming to such a conference that focuses on arts, music, and so on. So it's quite an honor and a great privilege to be here. I also realized that, particularly listening to the performances yesterday, that we talked about lived religion a lot, but we often don't live it. So it's particularly in academic context and academic conferences like this. So I really, really enjoyed the performances that we had yesterday. The charge given to me is that I will begin with some remarks and then invite my former student, now a colleague, to respond to it, and then we'll begin a conversation. I'm also happy that we have in this room other former students, Funlayo, who is there. So I feel I have accomplished a lot. I am blessed. My remarks will focus on my latest work on this man, Babalogo Bamatula. And from there, we will begin a kind of a conversation that relates to a lot of things, but particularly as we examine relationship between arts and religion. I grew up amid deities. Our home hosted numerous busts and insignias of Shigidi. In the house, the gods talked audibly and clearly. In the house, the gods talked audibly and clearly. Those are the words of Chief Logo, a medicine man and community leader who resides in the town where I grew up, Ileoluji in Ondo State, Nigeria. Chief Logo is 105 years old now. And a few years ago, I had the privilege to interview him, and I turned our conversation into a book titled In the Twilight of Time. And one recurring presence in our discussions was the Shigidi. The Shigidi are clay statues or effigies carved by ritually trained Yoruba artists. They are material statues, but they are imbued with spiritual agency, vitality, and speech. The Shigidi can speak, and at least to Baba Logo, they spoke a lot. They would act as sentinels outside Chief Logo's house, warning his father, Bamatula, when danger was on the way, or when a wild animal was gearing up to attack them. But they did not do this for free. The Shigidi demanded blood. And so it was Chief Logo's job, that is the son of Bamatula, to take the blood of a sacrificial goat and rub it on them. He would hear them thank him and invoke long life for him because of his work. Wadaigbo Babalogo. Oshe, Wadaigbo, may you live long. That's the response of the Shigidi to him. Hearing them thanking him, he would also acknowledge their presence. Upon Bamatula's death, however, Chief Logo recounts how the Shigidi left his home. They were heard wailing and leaving the town by a hunter who was nearby, a hunter who was later said to have died following the encounter with the Shigidi. I start with these stories about the Shigidi because I think the example narrows in on a critical component of the study of Black sacred arts today. How do we construct frameworks and theories of the material that can take seriously the production of artistic materiality that itself has agency? I've given the example of Shigidi because that is the context with which I'm most familiar. But the question of materiality, spirituality, and sacred artistic practices are broader than Yoruba ritual. I'm speaking of the art of voodoo practitioners in Benin. I'm speaking of the talking drum used throughout West Africa. They're called talking drums because they speak. We hear them. We can hear it. They can instruct us. We can react to that. I'm speaking of statues of Catholic saints that take up new meaning among Afro-diasporic religious traditions in America. I'm speaking too of the vamp of Black gospel music artists in the United States. I'm speaking of the new Pope, Leo XIV, who during his post-election Thanksgiving, that's the second day after the Vatican meeting, the Thanksgiving Mass that he presided over, given the College of Cardinals on May 9th, he was clad in a church vestment that points to his Peruvian Catholic identity. I'm speaking of those traditions which have a sense of sacred arts, not merely as a representative endeavor, which once having led a person to the place they want to go, is left behind. But art itself is operating within systems and world of spiritual agents. How do we reconstitute the contemporary academy so that they understand this? And that will include this whole edifice here, those who have brought us here, this wonderful conference. How do we make spirits real to our students in the classroom? It is an issue I've been dealing with since I started teaching. And one of my former students, who's a professor in Nigeria, wrote to me a few days ago and said, Oga, Master, we celebrated 50th anniversary of your teaching, which began in 1975. I was in tears, not almost in tears. I was 50 years of teaching. Because I was constantly dealing with that. How do I present it to my students in a way that they recognize that this is real? And yet they will not leave the place to say, our professor is a liar. I always struggle with it. I believe that one of the main reasons Western anthropological frameworks so often have failed to capture indigenous worldviews is that they are operating with latent theories of the material or representation that don't translate into diverse African contexts. A particular approach to semiotics might say that the material object is an outward symbol of a spiritual reality, but that the spiritual reality exists in a separate realm to the material which represent it. But when I turn to the Shigidi, such a representative framework doesn't work. Shigidi are carved from material, but they speak. Shigidi are clay statues, but they can go on errands to fight their keepers' errands. Shigidi are small effigies, but they can evade the arrows of those who try and attack them. In my scholarship, I've been committed to the construction of indigenous hermeneutical frameworks that examine African religious studies from the phenomenological perspective of African religious practitioners. I applied this in my ethnographic interviews with Chief Logo, and to hear his own stories about the Shigidi challenges my temptation to explain away their movements as superstitious or myth. Logo spoke his local dialect, but my translated in his statements, of course, reflects to some extent the meaning of that. In one part, he notes, and I quote, the Shigidi often responded verbally, clear as you are hearing me now. Logo, you will live long. You will grow old. Thank you, my child. Clean my bag for me. I will clean them up. They are not humans. They are statuses. They were molded with clay, but Father did something that activated speech in them. That is Bamatula, his father. They don't whisper, but talked normally like humans do. They lived in their house during that period. I will repeat one part of this. Father did something that activated speech in them. Here, I call on scholars of Black sacred arts to take seriously this potential line of inquiry. What is it that's something that activates agency in the act of Yoruba? This kind of encounter and this kind of meaning is quite important to us. What did Logo's father do here to activate speech in the Shigidi? In keeping with my emphasis on indigenous hermeneutics, I turn towards the diviners I know in Nigeria, and I asked them to draw from the oral literature of Ifa divination to explicate how aesthetics shares with Yoruba spirituality. Especially important here is Ere, E-R-E. That's what we call images. All those photos we saw yesterday relating to the UCLA, they're called Ere in that context. Ere simply translated means image, but it has a more specific meaning as a piece of wood in which an image is carved. The Yoruba insisted on the balance of the cosmos between entities like the sky and earth, the physical and the spiritual, means the area function as a kind of mediator between seen and unseen realms. Ere appears on the head of the Egungun, Yoruba masquerade, where people are inhabited by ancestral spirits. By wearing the ere and the mask, the participants are not just showcasing traditional dress culture, but a mode of transformation takes place here. The man becomes an ancestor. Another example I want to show you is Ere Ibeji, twins, starters. And I am Kehinde, the second of the twins, but is the senior of the two, because Yorubas are very obsessed with seniority. These are sculptures carved of wood to represent twins. Often, if a twin dies, a statue will be carved for them, not just as representative token, but as a manifestation of the spirit of the twin himself or herself. My grandmother did the same when my twin brother died, which she kept on the family altar in her hometown. My parents were missionaries. I should teach them. My father and they were Anglican priests, Episcopalians. But my grandmother made sure that the custom and the tradition were kept. One story the diviners tell us is of a boy whose elder sister hurt him. He ran to the Ibeji of his twin brother to tell him what had happened. Soon after, the sister was severely ill, almost to the point of death. So he reported the sister to the Ere Ibeji on the table there. They had to propitiate the Ibeji in order to bring about a recovery. Ere are not just simply carved as decorative figures, they subsist within a wider Yoruba cosmology, and so on. As the diviners tell me, when the carved image is washed with medicinal soap, it becomes alive. Like the moment when Chief Logos' father activates speech within the Shigidi. There's a moment here among the Ere Ibeji where speech is activated. And I'm sure you saw that yesterday, how we were struggling with the fact that all these images are kept in museums in the West, curated by people who do not understand the existence or the meaning in them. That moment of transformation, when Black sacred arts are not just created or perceived, but have their own agentic quality, is what I am fascinated by. The kind of enchantment of the natural and material world is the rule, not the exception among Africans and African diaspora communities. But seeing Ere Ibeji locked in the glass cases of Western museums, one might think that such figures are simply inert artistic displays. That's not so. I recall as a professor at UC Davis, I had a chance to go to Berkeley to look at the museum in anthropology department, and they begged me to come and take an image of Eshu. He said, Professor, we will give it to you. Take away. It was Bascom who collected them. And I said, what do you want me to do with it? he said, well, I said, by the way, why do you want it out of this place? He said, it is bothering us. We know there's a problem here. Come and take it, we'll give it to you. William Bascom, who worked in Nigeria in the 30s and 40s, collected those works that are still in the museum. But that's even better than what happens in a number of places. At Harvard, I'm sorry to say, Peabody Museum, some of these things are kept in boxes. They've been there for probably 60, 70 years. So that's another thing. My point is that an indigenous semiotical lens that takes seriously indigenous intellectual traditions and how they have theorized matter, arts, and creativity is deeply necessary. And this is a challenge to all of us. To combat the colonial histories and flattening of Yoruba cosmology that occurs within museums and academic spaces, we really need to act and act fast. Maybe what I'm calling us to do is nothing less than a new theory of the material, a theory of the material that graphs how, say for the Yorubas and other African ethno-linguistic groups, matter has always been enchanted, brimming with spiritualities. It must also be a theory that recognizes the innovative nature of many sacred arts traditions. I encourage my students to think about it, about a tripartite understanding of religious practice. Religion in terms of origin, function, and essence. Origin brings us to the field of the history of religions. Functions articulate the social position of religious practice among networks of living agents. But to speak of the essence of religious practice is to speak phenomenologically about the way epistemology, metaphysics, cosmology, and aesthetics manifest in real time among local communities. I don't have the time to demonstrate things because when I teach, I test my thesis and I use what they know very well to illustrate the importance of that type of approach to understanding religion and arts. I must also credit my late teacher, Peter Boga, who led some of us into thinking the way we think and interpret religion and arts. One can observe among the Yoruba, for example, that there are distinct rituals and specifications to be followed when carving certain ere. The body of Ifa knowledge, the diviners draw from recognize that the trees used to produce them are themselves agents of healing. I challenge my students to continue with analysis of these bodies of indigenous knowledge to get to grasp with the language and direction of the sacred, so to say. Otherwise, if we do not take actions, we are doomed to misunderstanding the worldview of religious traditions in Africa. Yoruba ritual strives on innovation, on creativity, and the addition of something new to what has come before. We read this in scholarly work, but practitioners tell us this themselves. The tradition is functional, keeping what works and rethinking what does not. The agency of artists and practitioners of Yoruba religions is in constant dialogue with the agency of the sculptural works and ritual objects they create. Our scholarship needs to be creative too, and to do justice to the agency of Black sacred arts in their varying forms. I've invoked these examples of Yoruba aesthetics to lead us towards a new language to capture the immediate presence and spirituality of such artistry. But each context needs to do its own work. I look forward to the conversation. But before I finish, let me make one more statement, which just came to me as my brother was trying to introduce me. It has to do with the deities, the orishas, be they in West Africa, Brazil, or Cuba, whatever it is. These deities and spirits are often presented in images. It is the images that are addressed and prayed to. So when the devotees kneel before the Orisha, they kneel before the images. That is the truth. Be it Obatala, be it Ifa, be it Eshu, and so on and so forth. As mediums of the transcendence and immanence, the power of the Orisha is portrayed and beyond through these visible images. This visible power and authority of the deities are fully represented in them. The power is in the images, but also in the silences of the images. And hence the Yoruba will say, Aki Jenigbe Orisha Niyi. Is the fact that the deities and images are very silent when you greet them. That's what gives them power and authority. It's the same thing that is bestowed on the sacred kings. I was dialoguing with one of our traditional kings, and they were complaining about his very senior priest. And I said, it is just not by mere accident that in the making of a king, the new prince will spend close to 6 months or 3 months in the initiation house. That is where they go through the rites and the images and everything they need to know. So once they leave that and they enter the palace, quite often you don't see them talking anyhow. I was also using it to talk about my own Anglican church, that maybe they need to borrow from this so that bishops will stop behaving as if they own the world. And let me congratulate the Episcopal Church of America for the move they took about Afrikaners who are coming here. They've chastised US government and said that they're not going to be part of that's gimmicks, because they're very concerned with the life of people. Race is an issue here. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Olupona, for your opening remarks. That was amazing. Bilolo, y'all, Bilolo. Okay, our next Dialogic keynote speaker is Dr. Kyrah Malika Daniels, who is an assistant professor of African American Studies at Emory University. She completed her BA in Africana Studies from Stanford University and earned her MA in Religion and her PhD in African and African American Studies at Harvard University. Her research centers on African heritage religions, sacred arts, religious initiation and conversion, and ritual healing traditions in the Black Atlantic world. For the 2019-2020 academic year, she was awarded the Getty ACLS Postdoctoral Fellowship in the History of Art. Daniels' first book, Art of the Healing Gods, Illness, Imbalance, and Sacred Arts of the Black Atlantic, is under contract with Duke University, which is scheduled to come out in 2026, so remember that, y'all. The book is a comparative religion project that examines ritual art traditions and religion healing legacies of Congo-derived communities in Haiti and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Art of the Healing Gods investigates how sacred art objects mediate relationships between humans and spirits in healing ceremonies to treat spiritual illness and imbalance holistically. Daniels' work has been published in the Journal of Africana Religions, Meridians, Feminism, Race, Transnationalism, and the Journal of Haitian Studies, and the Journal for American Academy of Religion. Between 2009 and 2010, Daniels served as a junior curator at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. Following the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, she worked at the Saint Raphael, Haiti, with the La Cou Soleil's Academic and Cultural Arts Center. Boom, yes, I vote for that, which is the grassroots organization that develops art-based pedagogy. Previously, she held the first appointment dedicated to African religious heritage traditions and African diaspora art history at Boston College. And as a Mambo Aso Gwe Aibobo, high priestess of Vodou, she's also a proud member of Societe Nago, Aoshenago. Daniels currently serves as a member of the board for directors of our Haitian Art Society, Leadership Council member of African and Diasporic Religious Studies Association, Adressa, I see you back there, and the co-vice president of COSAMBA, the Scholarly Association for the Study of Haitian Vodou. Please welcome Dr. Kyrah Malika Daniels.
Bonjour, bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. How are you all? Wonderful. I know we're going to be switching to another presentation. Thank you in advance for your assistance. Let me see if my clicker works or if I'll have to beseech you. Wonderful. Yes. That's a little too much. All right. So you're getting a little preview here. Allow me to first extend my sincere appreciation for the opportunity to share my work today at Yale University. I acknowledge that here in New Haven, Connecticut, we stand on unceded ancestral land of Quinnipiac and Algonquin Indigenous First Nations. Mabdi honneur. Honneur. This is in Haitian tradition, the way we open the road. And nous dit merci loyaux pour bay nou passage. Merci bon Dieu, merci Oloum. We give thanks for being in community and in communion. My sincere thanks to the director of the Institute of Sacred Music, Dr. Martin Jean, assistant director of the ISM, Dr. Eben Graves, and all members of the organizing committee, with special thanks to Mambo Dr. Charlene Desir, my sacred sister, and Unga Collin Edouard, my sacred brother. I was honored to participate in the ISM's inaugural Black Atlantic Sacred Arts Conference in 2022, and it is such an immense pleasure to return to you. As members of an African heritage tradition in the Americas, Haitian Vodou communities have navigated a difficult balance between invisibility and hypervisibility in Haiti and the world. Vodou has experienced countless attacks through history. Since Haiti's inception, this notably included French repression of African religions during enslavement and colonial rule in Saint-Domingue between the 16th and 18th centuries. Vodou also underwent major persecution during the anti-superstition campaigns of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially under the US Marine occupation. Following the 2010 earthquake, local and foreign evangelicals accused Vodou devotees of being somehow responsible for the devastating natural disaster and its reverberating aftermath. Recently, Haitian paramilitary gang leaders have ironically targeted Vodou communities as threats to the social, moral, and political order today. For hundreds of years then, Haitians have been ostracized, assaulted, imprisoned, and even killed for their participation in Vodou. Despite these harrowing realities and such unjust condemnation, Vodou's devotees have survived its many denouncements. This is largely due to their stealth in concealing evidence of their devotion. Indeed, Haiti's ancestral religious tradition has been required at numerous historical junctures to hide in plain sight, drawing minimal attention to the African-derived religion responsible for Haiti's independence today. My brief remarks here today employ an Africana religious studies framework and indigenous hermeneutics in the work of Dr. Jacob Olupona, and a sacred arts analysis of Haitian paintings and ritual flags known as drapeau to demonstrate how artists depict Vodou. a tradition which for generations has been expertly obscured and intentionally revealed to those deserving for the sake of protection in Haitian society. Everyone knows I like to start with my quotations. This is a Sierra Leonean Mende proverb as quoted in the outstanding and remarkable Sylvia Arden Boone's work, Radiance from the Waters. I will note briefly here that Sylvia Arden Boone was the first Black woman hired tenure track, the first Black woman to receive tenure here at Yale University, trained by Robert Ferris Thompson. This Mende proverb states, "Hanibelewe mangele yanjagili kango poa eto." There is a thing passing in the sky. Some thick clouds surround it. The uninitiated see nothing. Vodou spirits in saints' clothing, bedecked in a gold satin robe, the Saint Saint-Jacques Majeur, Saint James the Great, sits proudly astride a white stallion. For the sake of time, I'm going to walk us through. I have some very poetic language. I'm going to walk us through this quickly because I want to get to the two examples of these art. Can we actually lower the images? There's one button that says all lights off. Thank you so much. I want to point out that this work, which is housed in the Milwaukee Art Museum, ostensibly looks like a portrait of a saint whom some of us might be familiar with. We have a figure in a gold satin robe on a white stallion, part of this crusading troop. What's interesting is that the African Moors, who typically would be right here at the bottom, are missing. And I argue this is because the saint himself is Black. So there's no need for him to be conquering the African Moors because he himself is Black, right? There's a beautiful downward pressure created by this checkerwork grid pattern. And really what's important to understand is that though this is supposedly just an innocuous Catholic saint, it is so much more. So we might ask, what accounts for this coded veiling of Vodou religious art? We must begin with a deeper understanding of the religious mosaic formed between Catholicism and Vodou in Haiti. Because historically in the colony of Saint-Domingue, a Haitianizing of Catholicism took place alongside the formation of Vodou. And here, this is your 5-minute lesson in Congo history. I think it's always important to understand that Africans were not first introduced to Catholicism in the Americas. Okay, so we know that Africans were Christian before Europeans were Christian because King Ezana converted the kingdom of Aksum, Ethiopia, to Christianity in the 300s before Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, right? That's, if you didn't know that, now you know that. This is, however, an important component of Haitian history, which is that Congo Catholicism, you have King Joao I, who was formerly Mani Congo Nzinga Nku. He converted to Catholicism in 1491. What's interesting that they don't, this is a year before Columbus arrives in the Americas. He converts to Catholicism. Now he reverts. He goes back. He said, this Catholicism was nice for a tribe, and actually my indigenous religions have been holding me down. But he had two sons who battled over the kingdom. One son, Mpangua Nzinga, who represented indigenous religion, and his other son, Afonso I, formerly Mvemba Nzinga, who was a proponent of Catholicism. And during the two sons' epic battle, a vision appeared, and everyone on the battlefield bore witness to descent from the sky of two divine figures, the Virgin Mary and Saint James. And I make an argument that part of the reason that Saint James then became such a significant part of the Congo king's reign of power is because this vision indicated that he, the Catholic son, would declare victory and become the king of Congo and convert everybody to Catholicism. And I argue that this is probably why we have such a deep devotion to Saint-Jacques, specifically in Haiti today, because this is part of this Congo heritage. This is part of this Congo legacy of honoring a divinely chosen king. Following Haiti's declaration of independence from France in 1804, local Haitian citizens assumed roles of religious leadership in both Vodou and Catholicism. And so our drapeau of Saint-Jacques Majeur is a prime example of how cleverly Vodou adherents have disguised their Vodou spirits in saints' clothing, so to speak. Dozens of saint chromolithographs may be included as framed portraits on communal shrines and personal altars within Vodou households. When visiting péristyles or temples in Haiti's urban centers or in the countryside, the Loa are painted in large fresco murals on temples' walls. And such depictions are quite popular in Drapeau, as these devotees may comfortably and more safely display Catholic saint portraits in their homes without arousing suspicion about their relationship to Vodou. But in the words of famed ethnographer and novelist Zora Neale Hurston, let it be said that the Haitian gods, mysteries, or lois are not the Catholic calendar of saints done over in black, has been observed by casual ethnographers. The adepts have been busy recognizing the lithographs of the saints are African gods. So this ritual flag draws from a 500-year Congo Catholic lineage of honoring Saint-Jacques as an African religious icon. This becomes an important thread in a Haitian religious tapestry that interweaves an Africanized Catholicism with the plurality of African heritage religions. I'm going to be brief in this next example, noting that there is a powerful proverb stating that the dead are dying of thirst. I'll note here, how many of you have ancestors? Trick question, all of you do, okay? The reason that it is so important to begin with the ancestors as a point of departure for understanding the depth of these African-derived traditions is because these are regarded as the intercessors who are most powerful for any individual. These are those who knew you, who understood your lineage because they created you, right? And I think that it's really remarkable because there is a Dogon proverb in the work of Marcel Griol that states from the esteemed healer and priest Ogotomeli that the dead create disorder everywhere, but this disorder is simply a warning addressed to the living. For these disturbed souls are not seeking vengeance, but appealing to people to recognize the position of the departed and to ask for offerings, in this case of millet beer. When the family sets up an altar, the dead become ancestors, because indeed a Dogon proverb pronounces the dead are dying of thirst. I'm gonna make a pivot here that may seem wild, but stay with me. Kendrick Lamar. So the #1 fan of Kendrick Lamar is my 2.5-year-old son. The second is my husband. So I have to make honor here that this is how I was introduced to this. He has a 2012 song, Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst. And when I heard it for the first time, I mean, it's an homage to those who have tragically died and them beseeching the living who remain to ask for offerings, to be remembered, sing about me. And I'm dying of thirst is a request to ask for offerings. So when people, when I introduce my students to the concept of libations, I say, how many of you are familiar with libations? A few people may raise their hands. I said, how many of you have heard of pouring one out for the homies? Everybody knows that. Those are libations, right? And I think that this is such a wonderful example. I don't know whether Kendrick Lamar has read Ogotomeli, written by Marcel Griol in the 1960s, but somehow, somewhere, this concept of the dead need sustenance, and it is us who are charged with the task of feeding their spirits and their souls, has been remembered through African heritage traditions formally and also informally, because we know also in certain ways that hip hop is indeed an African-American religious tradition. So I want to note that one of the other methods of concealment in Haitian Vodou art is not portraying the African spirits as Catholic saints, but rather disguising them as people. And so this is a beautiful piece by André Pierre, who has depicted Baon Samedi, the Lord of the Dead, as a person. He is wearing an enormous cross. He has a book, a sacred text under his arm that almost looks like a Bible, but for those who know, they know this is actually probably a book of Veve. He's dressed as a Mason because Baon Samedi is identified, in fact, as a Mason. There's a long legacy of Black Freemasonry across the African diaspora in Haiti. The earliest Black Mason Lodge was established in the 1700s. And so let me conclude by noting that I wrote this essay in the aftermath of violence for Haiti's most vulnerable religious community of Vodouisans. In December 2024, nearly 200 Haitians were brutally killed in a massacre targeting Haitian Vodou adherents. The majority of those citizens murdered were elders, which represents an annihilation of multiple Vodou lineages in a single community. Since 2018, the rapid rise of paramilitary gang leadership and violent aggression has resulted in the displacement of nearly 1 million citizens. And in this 21st century era of such virulent anti-Blackness, these attacks reveal the depths of Afrophobia, what Dr. Diane Stewart refers to as Afrophobia, and religious racism exhibited by African descendants as well as Westerners. This work has highlighted how Haitian sacred arts illuminate the dangerous realities that Vaudouisans face in their adherence to an African ancestral religion that often must be hidden in plain sight to survive in the Haitian public sphere. Whether produced by formal religious initiates or not, the artists here portray different forms of Vodou religious devotion as expressed in depictions of the spirits and the saints. And in this way, Vodou retains an impressive power as a religion that has withstood centuries of colonial oppression and contemporary persecution. We are reminded here how Vaudouisans' adherence to the spirits have resulted in their endangerment in the Haitian public sphere, even as they reveal fortitude in an unwavering commitment to ancestral traditions. And ultimately, by acknowledging Vaudou's vulnerability as an African-derived religion in an anti-Black and Afrophobic world, we can also identify Africans' powerful resistance and claims to religious self-determination. Thank you so much.
I am just overwhelmed with joy. This was amazing. Your work really challenges us to consider how Black sacred expression speaks across borders and generations and disciplines, and how it calls us back to ourselves and each other. Now, I have some questions crafted, but I want to give you all a chance to respond to each other's opening remarks.
Maybe use the lights again.
Yep.
Be high tech enough. I want to thank my mentor, Baba Jacob Olupona, for gifting us with the concept, the framework of something our ancestors have known for so long. Indigenous hermeneutics is an erudite way, thank you for the lights, of saying knowledges, theories, and frameworks created by and for us. That is what is at the core of Indigenous hermeneutics. How do we use frameworks that function for us because they come from our communities? And very briefly, I'll note that Baba Lobo's explications of Shigidi is so powerful because you mentioned, Baba, that they are made with clay but are activated for speech. And we know that Baba Obatala crafted humankind from clay. So to activate them with speech is indeed recognizing that humans too are made of clay. And that's something that we recognize even in the Christian tradition, right? So this idea that clay is so malleable and also human-like because it seems to take on qualities of flesh is quite profound. And I'll note here that with the Ere Ibeji, the sacred twins, they are washed with a medicinal soap, as Dr. Olupona points out, right? So like newborn babies are washed in sacred water, these children are coming to life through being ritually bathed. Both require this activation. And I'll just end by noting that there is such an important component here that you've highlighted for us, Dr. Olupona, of this dance between the power of silence and the power of speech, that both signal authority. And I sense that there was something there, you know, this dancing with a paradox is something that I was grappling with too, because on the one hand, Vodou devotees experience such vulnerability to the point where it is at times incriminating even to identify yourself as a Vaudouisan in Haiti or outside of Haiti. And yet there's also a great power that comes with being able to identify somebody or oneself as Frangine, Msevilua. Most Vaudouisans will not say, I am a Vaudouisan. They will say, Msevilua, I serve the spirits, right? And even that is its own coded andaki. Even that is its own coded form of signaling something while still veiling it, while still concealing it. So I'll end there.
Thank you very much. You are very much aware of a kind of an academic habit I have, and that is that I'm constantly translating. Just to such an extent that even when I listen to a whole speech, I try to reduce it to proverbs, just one proverb. Say, this is what I have had. As we're talking about ancestral spirituality earlier on, my mind went to an experience, very fascinating experience I had in my mother's hometown. again, the town where I was born as a twin. And my parents were teachers, so they met there and they got married. We go there every, at least when all my aunts and uncles were alive, for the harvest Thanksgiving as Anglicans. And there was a particular time when we all assembled for this service in the church. And they had to call the family, our lineage, to come and give the offering at the temple, at the altar. And the regular Anglican Christian song was what, the organist, the pastor announced. It's a harvest song that we all sing all over the world. It was very dull. The organist felt, and the organist would be shouting on the choir, sing, sing, sing. The thing was so slow. My aunties, my uncles, they were kind of drifting to the thing, as if they were mourning. And all of a sudden, the organist, I think he must be in his 80s, changed the tone of what happened. He began to play the ancestral music. Because the lineage owned one of the oldest egungun in town. They call it. That's a grandmother's lineage. And whenever this ancestral egungun comes out, no other egungun must compete with them. They will all be hiding somewhere or pay, wherever they are paying obeisance to this great ancestral thing. And all of a sudden, as the organist was playing that, which is almost like a kind of a warlike thing, Holy Fagia, I saw it was as if my aunties and uncles were drunk. But more than that, the entire church rose in respect of this acknowledgement of this great ancestral Egungun. And then they were all really there, and organist was so happy and singing and so on. The point I'm trying to make, here we are in a Christian church. We're singing the regular Anglican song that didn't quite work. And then the organist, an old organist who knew the family, who knew everything, and knew things about the importance of this ancestral spirit and tradition, changed the course of that. I'm almost certain the church collected more than they thought we were going to collect in terms of money that day, because the entire church rose up to do the Thanksgiving with us. So what does it tell us? As scholars, we often see these things in terms of theories in there. But there are different ways of showing that. I think a few days ago, I had another conversation somewhere, and I revealed that my passwords, things that have to do with my identity when I use my computer, they all came from my mother. My mother's birthday, my mother's full name. If I notice that some people are trying to kind of hack into my thing, I will change the thing and use another one, maybe use a middle name. So in other words, the ancestral thing you're talking about is always with me. And it's what I remember every day of my life. And I'm not a young man. So in other words, we're talking of a kind of a spirituality that is so important and so central to African traditions in Africa and also even in the diaspora. Let me respond to the questions of the power of silence versus the power of speech. The truth of the matter is that it is the speech that gives a share the power that it evokes. The king controls both. But what is also interesting is how democratic this is in the African context. For example, I can refer to this assembly and talk about the share of this assembly. In other words, you're referring to the sacred authority of this gathering, well constituted under the structures that have been established as a body that has authority, that has power, that has agency, that has presence, that has a meaning in that context. So it's not just a share is not just limited to the deities and to the orishas, or even the king. As we say, Oba Alashe, the king has a share, and that's the reason why the kings are so powerful that, in fact, they're encouraged not to say much. They really do not talk. If you have a traditional ruler or a king or Oba who's constantly talking and these things, the community will condemn him. That is the case, and it's happening now in Nigeria. So that type of almost dialectics between silence in that, as I argued, is the silence of the Orisha that gives the Orisha the authority and power. Hence, the proverb I used earlier on as Akije, Nigbe, Orisha, Niyu. Another interesting thing that I think I picked up from your representation itself is that we often see the line between Christianity and indigenous spirituality and religion as if they're pretty separate. It's not always the case. And I think scholars must be truthful enough to recognize the relationship between the one and the other and the second. One of the things I try to do as a teacher, and you probably noticed that in my talk today, I refer several times to my students, because I believe that there's a connection between one's own research and one's own teaching. And one of the things I do with my doctoral students is that if they say they are doing African religion, I want to know what, apart from African indigenous religion, they are able and willing to teach. They may not be doing research in that area, but at least in terms of teaching. So I expect a graduate from my department, under my watch, under my advisory, to be able to have at least three areas that are connected, so that when they leave, not only are they going to be marketable, but also they are pretty competent in these very wide areas of interest. And I think that is quite important to recognize. And then maybe one last thing I'd like to pose to you, Kyrah, and it has to do with the issue of the demonization of voodoo. And connected with that is the notion, the conception of blackness, and how that was kind of formed alongside this demonization of the derived religions, not just in voodoo, but also other related ones. The question for me is that, why is it that it's the white smoke that signals the election of a new pope and not the other way around? As much as I like the story going on about this new pope, I begin to question that. What is it about this? And of course, it relates to race.
Yes.
And whether we like it or not, the problem, which is racism, has refused to go. And I always think about it. I wish it's something that we're able to kind of deal away with, so that we can spend our time doing the go real things. But we are not, able to do that. And that is why in the academy itself, it's become a major issue and a problematic problematic issue that we have to respond to. And I think lastly, I've said a lot, right? I think lastly, the questions of indigenous immunotics. Let me come back to it. Why has it become very important in our thought system and in our scholarship? Why is Jacob Olupona so obsessed with it that if you're doing a doctorate under me at UC Davis, Harvard, you have to take it very seriously. And this is why. The assumption in theory, somehow, that our students are trying to, which is totally wrong, is that those ideas and concepts must be must allied with certain preconceived ideas and philosophical things that have been passed on to us. And when I encourage the students to read philosophy, the constant of Western philosophical ideas and thoughts, I believe it is the beginning of it. It is often not known or recognized that the traditions we are dealing with are integrated traditions, and they contain within them significant canons that can become the beginning of theory. So, and I'll tell you how I got to that. Because I used to get towards the end of my stay there, when my dear friend, Clarence Walker, a very famous African American historian, spoke at a seminar on philosophy of history. And I think they deliberately wanted to put me on the spot. We're talking about what is history. And think of what is history in Yoruba? How do people define and talk about history? I quickly scrambled because I was just sitting and enjoying my history while then it occurred to me that history, and this is why language is important, is derived from two verbs itself. T-A-N, Tom, which would be to put on the candle or to lighten something like that, so I will not be able to see. Or not, you put on the light. Dr. No, put on the light. It also means to spread. You spread something from one point to the other, you kind of spread it. So it travels from one place to the other. In other words, history lightens the darkness. History also spreads. And the Yoruba a program that talks about if a child says he did not witness a particular historical event, say for example, some of our young kids today who were not there when Martin Luther King did all his work that became the beginning of the civil rights movement. The child cannot say. The retelling of history. It always the history said the events that took place. Arowa is the retelling of it. And the Yorubas in their wisdom says it is in the retelling of this history. The retelling itself is the mother of history. Arowa is like the father of history. Mother of history. In other words, the retelling of the story, the primordial original story itself is very important. So the child cannot say, all those who have gone to last high school, so they can't tell us they were not been told about the civil rights movement. Or they would have so now, and then Edouard jumped up and said to me, Professor Olupona, why are you African scholars spending all your time reading Foucault and Guyama and Tillich and saying and behaving as if you do not cite them or reference them or make them the basis of theory, you are not theorizing. And then have very profound understanding of what history eat and you're not making good decisions. This is the problem that we all face as blacks. That we did, and if you look at the number of black professors who have been very successful, such as my very good friend, CK, and Harvard, you find out that that was what you elaborate. You look at significant monkey, you see how they have used Yoruba epistemology and Yoruba ontology to talk about, the work. And we need to begin to look at that and look at I can go on and on, but I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. You see, fantastic. Fantastic. I'm going to give Professor Daniels the last word I've always wanted to know what it's like to be a Harvard student and be in your lecture, and now I know. This is fantastic. Thank you very much. I've got my wish. Professor Daniels, I'm going to give you last word on this topic here about ethics, okay? It's a meaty one, but you can close us off by your words. So how can scholars, coming back to students and encouraging students to have different fields, how can they ethically and rigorously study Black sacred arts without extracting or flattening the spiritual, communal, and esoteric dimensions of these practices? What can they do? How do we guard against the tokenism, right, of the Black sacred arts and public-facing projects? And what tensions or collaborations arise between practitioners and researchers of Black sacred arts traditions? One more. How might we build models of co-authorship and co-creation?
30 seconds, go.
I know. I wanted to get to ethics, but yes.
Certainly, and thank you so much, Collin, for posing such a thoughtful series of questions. I want to echo something that Dr. Olupona shared about the importance of learning languages. And here I have to acknowledge that I have studied Kikongo, I have studied Lingala. I am very far from where I would like to be in my familiarity with those languages. And yet, the importance of learning languages is essential for many of the reasons that Dr. Olupona has highlighted, and because certain things, concepts, philosophies, ways of being simply can't be translated. And so if you don't understand that Kalunga in Kikongo cosmology is the afterlife, but it is also the realm of the unborn, the realm of the ancestors, and the realm of the spirits, how can you understand that it's not just a watery tomb, but also a watery womb, right? How can you understand the depth of that understanding if you don't understand, but this is what the word means in its context? So I really want to underscore that ethics requires Indigenous language learning. And that needs to be taken more seriously with African and African diaspora traditions. If you study Buddhism in Tibet, nobody would allow you to be regarded as a serious Tibetan Buddhist scholar if you didn't learn Tibetan and Sanskrit and. It should be the same expectation with Africana traditions. And that means not only learning Spanish if you're doing work in Cuba, that also means learning Lukumi to the extent possible. I think that we have to hold researchers and institutions accountable for how they are engaging with communities in respectful ways or not. And sometimes that means gathering people up who have done harm to communities. I don't always think that that has to be in fashions that recreate violence, but we have to be intentional about making sure that we are citing Black and Brown people. We have to be intentional about citing women and gender non-binary folks. We have to be intentional about not assigning certain texts that have caused harm, right? That have not, that reveal that a researcher has not engaged ethically. I think it means, in the context, for instance, of museums, Dr. Patrick Polk highlighted this so eloquently yesterday, thinking about, well, what does it look like to say the arts of sacred Vodou will be done differently moving forward, because we want to make sure there's as much respect as we can offer. We want to recognize that perhaps this is not the place to recreate an altar without the Ungan, the Mambo, to bless it, to sanctify it, or even to deactivate works. So I think language is key. I think engaging in respectful partnerships is key. Citations are key. Humility, right? We'll take it back to Kendrick Lamar. Sit down and be humble. Sometimes we need to do that. Sometimes we need to be quiet and listen to what the communities say. And lastly, I'll say centering the voices of those scholar initiates and those initiates, right? Because there is a difference between scholars and experts, right? So there are cultural experts who don't have degrees and who have such deep wisdom to share. And to make sure that we are honoring those insights, we have to think about ways to do so in fashions that are collaborative and engage in exchange rather than thinking about extracting. I'll end there.
There's so much to drop. I mean, I'm going to be thinking about this keynote for a very long time. I want to thank you both for taking the time today. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.